Most of you are probably already thinking of cities in California, and well, you'd be right. Currently, there are just under 600,000 homeless people in the US, according to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. There are several ways to make this list, with one being the most amount of homeless people per capita. The problem with that is you'd end up with a list of small towns that no one has ever heard of. So for this list, we will go with raw numbers, which then brings us to the New York versus Los Angeles debate. New York City actually has more homeless people, but fewer unsheltered homeless people. Unsheltered homeless means they are living on the streets, in tents, or in the subway. Sheltered homeless are people who may be considered homeless but are staying on a friend's couch or in a hotel. Getting an accurate picture is tough since homelessness can be defined in so many ways, so here is our best list based on the city's reported numbers on unsheltered homeless people. Starting with number 10. This one may surprise you. New York City. While some stats will put New York City at number 1, thanks to the right to shelter law, there are actually only around 2,500 unsheltered homeless in New York. Of the roughly 80,000 homeless in New York City, only 5% live in public spaces, compared to Los Angeles, in which 70% of theirs live in public spaces. The number of unsheltered homeless in New York actually takes this city off this list altogether, but we had to include it because it's such an anomaly. Though New York isn't the ideal climate with harsh winters and hot, humid summers, unaffordable housing and limited housing pave the way for the homeless crisis. New Yorkers are generous with giving food and money to those in need, and their right to shelter law, which, although hasn't solved the underlying problem, at least helped 95% remain sheltered. Number 9 is Philadelphia, with approximately 4,500 unsheltered homeless people. Another city that doesn't have a climate that would be welcoming to the outdoors. About 18% of Philly's homeless population is unsheltered, and the city of brotherly love has done a lot to house as many as they can. Studies show that many hesitate to go to a shelter despite there being beds available for fear of personal safety, loss of dignity, and disruption of relationships and routines. Obviously, the stigma against those who are homeless make getting help a challenge as well. Many assume that people are homeless because of poor choices, while not considering their other circumstances like mental health issues. Number 8 is Washington, D.C., with approximately 4,900 unsheltered homeless people. This is the second to last city that we'll see with a less than hospitable climate for those living in the elements. Income inequality is a big factor in DC. Sadly, the number of homeless people has increased by 11.6% since 2022. This year also saw a rise in younger people being unhoused, as well as a higher rate of substance abuse. Due to the increase, lawmakers are trying to increase the budget to help the rising numbers. Sadly, this uptick came after a steady decline. High housing costs and racial disparities also account for the crisis, as 83% of all those who are homeless are Black, despite only making up 45% of the population. It's hard not to take action in such a tourist-heavy city that represents our nation as the capital city. Number 7 is Las Vegas, where an estimated 5,645 people were either homeless or living in shelters, with a staggering 14,000 people experiencing homelessness at least once in the last year. Sin City may be a hotspot for tourists, but it's hard to walk down the streets without being confronted by the homeless crisis. With gambling and substance abuse at every corner, it's easy to see how people could end up without a home. Couple that with the cost of housing, aging out of the foster system, and a lack of address to put on a job application, and you can see why there is a crisis. Sadly for Las Vegas, the homeless youth are most vulnerable to sex trafficking and prostitution. Some turn to prostitution to make ends meet, while others fall victim to predators who are trying to capitalize off of the city's sinful reputation. Number 6 takes us out to California, where the majority of this list will sit. San Jose, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, has over 6,000 homeless residents. They also represent one of the youngest homeless populations. The unhoused is jarring for anyone who is living, working, or visiting San Jose. Unfortunately for San Jose, the numbers are on the rise. Students at San Jose University have been well aware of the rising crisis and have been rallying for school administrators to provide relief in terms of beds and emergency funds. A staggering 11% of students in San Jose have self-reported as being homeless at least one day in the past year. The city has partnered with a local organization to build new apartments for young people, but it will not be finished until at least 2024. High cost of living can take a toll on young people, particularly those who grew up in San Jose but can't afford to actually live there. Number 5 is Phoenix, Arizona. There's no doubt people may be attracted by the weather. If you have to live in the elements, then Phoenix at least has plenty of sun. There are about 6,000 homeless people in Phoenix, and like many cities, housing costs, substance abuse, and mental illness are all factors. Sadly, Phoenix is in a Titanic lifeboat situation with less than half the amount of shelter beds needed to provide shelter for all their homeless population. Many homeless encampments are said to be unsafe, but many residents still refuse to move into a shelter, citing strict curfews, rules, and a no-tolerance policy for drug use, which is sadly how many homeless residents in Phoenix cope with the pain. Many neighborhoods have sued the government to remove the ever-sprawling camps of tents that have infiltrated local streets, leaving behind a wake of trash, needles, and crime. It's a shame that there isn't access to better mental health care for those who seek treatment, but this seems to be a nationwide issue among the unhoused. Number 4 is San Diego with 10,200. With all around the perfect climate, it's no wonder there are 2 cities in Southern California that make this list. The homeless population in San Diego increased by 32% since 2022 and seems to be still growing. This may come to a screeching halt as the San Diego City Council is set to vote on a proposed camping ban that will try to break up tent encampments that officials say threaten public health and safety. Residents of San Diego seem divided on the issue, though it seems like those that are against the ban aren't directly affected. Those that live in wealthy suburbs don't have to walk past hundreds of tents to get around the corner. City officials receive an average of 2,200 citizen complaints each month about the encampments, and they have admitted that they've been unable to keep up with quality of life expectations. Number 3 is San Francisco with 38,000. The only surprise here is that it isn't number 1, but when you consider that they have nearly 40,000 homeless people with a population of only 815,201, then that puts it into perspective. New York has double the homeless but 10 times the population. Tents, homeless, needles, and open defecation have almost become synonymous with San Francisco. San Francisco has a housing crisis with a mix of both unaffordable housing and a limited amount of housing. The government has also been very friendly to the needs of the unhoused, which has yielded both praise and criticism. Famous for their syringe access service, drug users in San Francisco are given clean needles and drug use paraphernalia in order to reduce the spread of HIV and AIDS. Needless to say, this controversial policy has been brought under fire. Some of its harshest critics are former drug users themselves, who said that San Francisco's syringe policy has kept addicts in a state of bondage. The homeless crisis in San Francisco has gotten so bad that it's impacting their tourism industry. A medical group that held conventions in San Francisco since the 1980s had pulled out their $40 million investment for fear that the city streets just weren't safe for its participants. This has been a growing concern for San Francisco officials who have been overwhelmed. Many people cite the city's policies as the cause for the crisis, whereas New York has seemed to do a much better job providing shelter and safety. Number 2 is Seattle with about 40,000. Though the actual number varies dramatically, this estimate is on the higher end, landing Seattle in the number 2 position. This one is shocking given the climate. Though not as cold as Boston or New York, the city is famous for its rain. Seattle has become more transparent about its homeless problem and has enacted several policies to help mitigate the rising cases of homelessness. This included providing 2,000 permanent to semi-permanent housing units that are affordable thanks to the new permit regulations. In 2015, the then mayor declared a state of emergency for homelessness. This emergency was also exacerbated by the pandemic, but it isn't only a new phenomenon. Seattle has a history of race-based zoning that has led to gaps in generational wealth that are disproportionately felt by Black and American Indian/Alaska Native communities who disproportionately represent the homeless population. Before we get to number 1, here are a few other cities that are also facing a homelessness crisis, although as smaller cities, they had numbers too small to make the list. Nashville and Salt Lake City are no strangers to this crisis. Nashville in particular sees most of its homeless in the downtown area where thousands of tourists visit each day and often give money or food to those begging on the streets. Compassionate as that may be, it does little to discourage panhandling. Honolulu is another city facing a crisis. This tourist-heavy city with the highest housing costs in the nation has left its Hawaiian natives in the dust as property values have priced the locals out of paradise. Though this list focuses on America, the #1 city in the world for homelessness is Manila, Philippines, where there are 1.2 million homeless children alone. Moscow, Mexico City, Mumbai, and Jakarta come in just after. #1 for our list is Los Angeles, with an estimated range of 47,900 to 63,700 unhoused individuals, where a staggering 70% are unsheltered. This by far makes the City of Angels the top spot on this list. It's rumored that there are no streets or underpasses left in Los Angeles that don't have a tent encampment on it, and sadly this is no exaggeration. City officials are being pushed to their limits as angry voters demand change. California city mayors have long since been accused of being too tolerant, to the point where they are attracting unhoused people to come and set up camp in LA. The most famous encampment in LA is Skid Row. Many documentaries have been made to chronicle life there. Skid Row contains the largest stable population of homeless people, ranging from 9,200 to 15,000 fairly permanent residents. Skid Row crimes make up 59% of all crime in downtown Los Angeles. There is an epidemic of substance abuse and mental health issues on Skid Row. This falls in sharp contrast with some of the nation's wealthiest neighborhoods, like Beverly Hills or Bel Air. Have you seen an increase of homelessness in your area? What are local residents doing to make a difference? Like and subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments below what community action can be taken to help curb this crisis.